Some people need minimalism to breathe, not as a design trend, as neurological survival. They walk into a store and feel their chest tighten. Too many colors, too many objects screaming for attention. Shelves stacked with things they'll never need, wrapped in promises they'll never believe. And then they come home, to empty counters, to white walls, to a single chair by the window, and finally, their nervous system stops screaming. It's a physical reaction, a visceral drop in blood pressure, a loosening of the shoulders that they didn't even realize were hunched. Schopenhauer understood this instinctively. He knew that sensitive minds suffer more in a world built for excess. He argued that the more intelligent and sensitive a mind is, the more it perceives pain in the chaos. That simplicity isn't minimalism for its own sake. It's self-preservation, a neurological boundary between the chaos outside and the quiet truth inside. But here's what most people never notice. The person who needs minimalism to breathe isn't running away from life. They're protecting the only space where they can still think clearly. They are guarding the sanctuary of their own attention. And if you've ever felt relief when you cleared a shelf, or peace when you walked into an empty room, you're about to understand why. Because this isn't even about minimalism. It's about what your brain has been trying to tell you for years. Most people think minimalism is about aesthetics, clean lines, neutral palettes, Instagram-worthy rooms that look like no one actually lives there. They think it's a style you buy into, a catalogue you copy. But that's not what this is. For some people, minimalism isn't a choice. It's oxygen. It's the difference between a nervous system that can rest and one that's constantly on fire. It is the difference between functioning and drowning. Let me tell you what I mean. I used to think I was just particular, that I had strong preferences about my space, that I liked things just so. I thought it was a quirk, a personality trait, but it was deeper than that. It was biological. I remember walking into a friend's apartment once. Beautiful place, expensive furniture, shelves filled with books and trinkets and souvenirs from trips around the world. It was a museum of a life well lived. And yet, I felt my chest tighten within minutes. Not because it was messy. It wasn't. Everything was arranged carefully, thoughtfully even. But there was so much, so many objects competing for attention, so many colors pulling my eyes in different directions. Every surface had a story. Every corner had a texture. I couldn't focus, couldn't relax, couldn't breathe. My brain was trying to process every single item simultaneously, and it was overheating. And when I got home that night, to my nearly empty living room, my white walls, my single bookshelf, I felt my entire body exhale. It wasn't just relief. It was a return to self. That's when I realized, this isn't about preference. This is about survival. Schopenhauer wrote about this, though he never used the word minimalism. He understood that sensitive people with rich inner worlds, suffer more in environments built for noise and excess. He believed that the will, that driving force of desire and life, is constantly agitated by external stimuli, that the external world drains them faster, that they need simplicity not as a luxury, but as a necessity. He called it the burden of perception. The idea that some minds process more, feel more, notice more, and therefore need less stimulation to function. Think of it like a radio receiver that is tuned too perfectly. It picks up every station, every static, every distant signal. For these people, clutter isn't just visual noise. It's emotional weight. It's cognitive overload. It's 1,000 tiny demands piling up until the brain can't process anything clearly anymore. Every object emits a frequency, a silent hum. And minimalism becomes the only way to create space for thought, for peace, for clarity. It is the act of turning down the volume of the world so you can hear your own thoughts. Pay attention to this part. The person who needs minimalism to breathe doesn't hate beautiful things. They don't reject possessions out of some moral superiority or ascetic philosophy. They aren't trying to be monks. They reject them because their nervous system can't handle the noise, because every object in their space carries a subtle demand, a memory, a decision, a responsibility. Look around your room right now. Really look. That vase on the shelf. It needs dusting. It needs to be kept safe. It needs to be appreciated. It reminds you of the aunt who gave it to you and the guilt that you don't call her enough. That stack of books. They need to be read, or donated, or organized. They are a pile of unfulfilled intentions. They are mocking you for the time you don't have. That collection of souvenirs, they need to mean something, to justify their presence. They are frozen moments of the past demanding to be remembered in the present. And for most people, these demands are background noise, barely noticeable, easy to ignore. They can walk past a cluttered table and see nothing but a table. But for the person who needs minimalism to breathe, these demands are deafening. They walk past the table and hear a chorus of unfinished tasks. This is where the psychology becomes unmistakable. Research in environmental psychology shows that visual clutter increases cortisol levels, the stress hormone. That cluttered spaces make it harder to focus, harder to relax, harder to process emotions. Our brains evolved in the savannah, scanning the horizon for threats. When the horizon of your living room is filled with hundreds of objects, the primitive brain never truly settles. It is constantly scanning, constantly processing, constantly on alert. But for some people, this effect is amplified. Their brains are wired to notice more, process more, feel more. Psychologists call it sensory processing sensitivity, the trait of being deeply affected by external stimuli, sounds, sights, textures, even the emotional energy of a space. And for these people, minimalism isn't about following a trend. It's about creating an environment where their brain can finally stop working so hard just to exist, where they can think without distraction, feel without overwhelm, rest without resistance. Let me speak directly to you. If you've ever walked into a store and felt your chest tighten, not because you were anxious, but because there was just too much, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever felt relief when you cleared a shelf, donated a box of things, or walked into an empty room, you felt this. If you've ever looked at someone's cluttered, chaotic home and thought, how do they live like this? Not with judgment, but with genuine confusion. You understand. You wonder how they can hear themselves think. Because for you, clutter isn't just visual noise. It's emotional noise. It's cognitive noise. It's the feeling of being pulled in 1,000 directions at once, even when you're standing still. And minimalism isn't about being trendy or disciplined or morally superior. It's about creating a space where you can finally breathe. It is about building a sanctuary where the external world is not allowed to invade. There's another layer here that most people never see. The person who needs minimalism to breathe is often the same person who feels drained by socializing, who finds small talk exhausting, who needs hours alone to recover after being around people. And this isn't a coincidence, because both minimalism and solitude serve the same function. They reduce input. They create space for the brain to process, to rest, to simply exist without constant demands. Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He wrote that solitude is the natural state of the philosopher, not because they hate people, but because they need silence to think clearly. He argued that a man can be in perfect harmony only with himself, not with a friend, not with a partner, but only with himself. And the same is true for the person who needs minimalism. They don't hate objects. They don't hate beauty. They don't hate life. They just need less of it in their immediate environment so they can engage with it more deeply. They want quality of interaction, not quantity of stimulation. To outsiders, this looks like deprivation, like someone who's given up, who's settled, who's missing out. They see the empty walls and think sadness. But internally, it's the opposite. It's freedom. Freedom from the constant pressure to want more, to buy more, to display more. Freedom from the exhausting performance of keeping up with a lifestyle that never felt natural. Freedom to finally live in a way that matches their internal rhythm. This is what psychologists call congruence, when your external life matches your internal truth. And for the person who needs minimalism, congruence looks like empty counters, white walls, and a single chair by the window. But there's a paradox here. The person who needs minimalism to breathe often feels lonely in their choice, because the world celebrates abundance, accumulation, more. Every advertisement, every movie, every magazine tells you that a full life equals a full house. And when you choose less, you're choosing to step outside that narrative. You're choosing to live in a way that most people don't understand. And that can feel isolating. But here's the truth. You're not alone. There are millions of people who feel exactly the same way, who walk into their quiet, minimal homes and exhale, who feel peace in empty spaces, who understand that less isn't deprivation, it's clarity. This quiet shift is happening all over the world. People who spent decades drowning in excess are finally choosing simplicity, not as a trend, as survival, and they're finding each other in quiet corners of the internet, places like this one. Before we continue, if this resonates with you, join this quiet corner. Share in the comments, what moment made you realize you needed less to breathe more? Was it a specific day? A specific object you finally let go of? Because what comes next is where the psychology becomes unmistakable. Schopenhauer also wrote about the concept of will, the constant, restless desire that drives human suffering. He believed that the key to peace was not to satisfy every desire, but to quiet the will itself, to stop wanting, to stop chasing, to stop accumulating. And this is exactly what happens when someone embraces minimalism. They're not just clearing physical space, they're quieting the will, they're choosing peace over performance, they're choosing clarity over chaos, and in doing so, they're reclaiming their life. Carl Jung adds another dimension to this. He spoke of the persona, the mask we wear for society. For the first half of our lives, we build this persona. We accumulate degrees, titles, relationships, and yes, possessions. We build a house full of things to show the world who we are. But Jung believed the second half of life serves a different purpose. It is for the self. And the self doesn't need props. The self doesn't need a crowded room to feel valid. The person who turns to minimalism later in life is often unconsciously shedding their persona. They are putting down the mask. They are realizing that the objects they spent years collecting were for the audience, not for the actor. Here's where it gets interesting. The person who needs minimalism to breathe often spent years trying to live like everyone else. They bought things because that's what people do. They filled their homes because empty spaces felt strange. They tried to enjoy shopping, to find joy in accumulating, to feel normal. But it never worked, because their brain was never wired for excess. And after years, sometimes decades, of trying to fit into a world that values more, they finally give themselves permission to choose less. Not because they're lazy, not because they're cold, not because they don't care, but because they finally learned to listen to what their body has been saying all along. There's a moment that happens in this journey, a turning point. It's the moment when you realize that the relief you feel in an empty room isn't sadness. It's not loneliness. It's not deprivation. It's peace. Real, deep, cellular peace. The kind of peace that comes when your nervous system finally stops defending itself against constant input. When your brain finally gets permission to rest. When you finally understand that you're not broken for needing less. You're just wired differently. And here's what most people never tell you. The person who needs minimalism to breathe often carries guilt. Guilt for not wanting more. Guilt for not being excited about shopping. Guilt for not filling their home with memories and collections. Guilt for throwing away the gift that you never liked but kept for 10 years out of obligation. But that guilt is misplaced, because you're not missing out. You're choosing differently. You're choosing a life that matches your nervous system, your energy, your truth. And that's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to honor. Rilke, the poet of solitude, once said that we must protect our inner solitude, for it is the garden where our soul grows. Clutter is the weeds in that garden. It chokes the space where you are meant to grow. Clearing it isn't an act of destruction. It is an act of cultivation. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. The minimalist doesn't walk into a store and feel tempted. They feel drained. They don't see a sale and think, what a great deal. They think, what a great burden. They see the maintenance, the cleaning, the storage, the mental weight of ownership. They don't accumulate possessions over the years. They shed them. Slowly, deliberately, like peeling away layers of noise until only the essential remains. And when they finally get home, to their empty counters, their white walls, their single chair by the window, they don't feel like they're missing anything. They feel like they've finally found everything. This isn't something you need to fix. This isn't a flaw. This isn't a weakness. This is your brain telling you what it needs to function, to rest, to think, to be. And the world will never understand this. The world will call you boring, ascetic, joyless. They will try to fill your hands with more things, thinking they are helping you. But the world doesn't live inside your nervous system. The world doesn't feel what you feel when you walk into a cluttered room and your chest tightens. The world doesn't know what it's like to finally come home to an empty space and feel your entire body exhale. You do. And that's enough. After years of trying to keep up, with the consumption, the accumulation, the endless pursuit of more, you finally realize something the world refuses to admit. More isn't better. More is just more. And for some people, more is suffocating. Minimalism isn't about rejecting life. It's about reclaiming it. It's about creating a space where your brain can finally stop working so hard just to exist, where you can think without distraction, feel without overwhelm, rest without resistance, where you can finally breathe. The person who needs minimalism to breathe is not rejecting the world. They're curating it. They're deciding what deserves their attention, their energy, their space, and they're saying no to everything else. This is not passivity. This is sovereignty. This is someone who has learned that their peace is more valuable than anyone else's opinion, that their clarity is more important than fitting in, that their breath, their ability to simply exist without constant input, is worth protecting. Schopenhauer spent his life writing about suffering, sensitivity, and the search for peace, and his conclusion was simple. The less we want, the less we suffer. The quieter our external world, the richer our internal world. The more we simplify, the more we breathe. And this is the gift of minimalism. Not the empty counters, not the white walls, not the single chair by the window, but the breath, the peace, the clarity, the freedom to finally live in a way that feels true. So if you've ever walked into your quiet home and exhaled, you're not alone. If you've ever felt relief when you cleared a shelf, you're not broken. If you've ever needed less to feel more, you're not missing out. You're just someone who needs minimalism to breathe. And that's not a flaw, that's wisdom. It is the wisdom of knowing yourself well enough to build a life that supports you, rather than a life that drains you. But here's the paradox most people never see. The same person who finds peace in minimalism often struggles with something deeper. They've cleared their space, they've quieted the noise, they've created the sanctuary, and yet there's still a restlessness inside, a quiet voice asking, is this enough? Is this all there is? Because minimalism solves the external chaos, but it doesn't always answer the internal question, the question about meaning, about purpose, about whether a quiet life is a full life. And that question, the one about what you do with all this space you've created, all this peace you've protected, is what we'll explore next. Because once you've learned to breathe, the real question becomes, what do you do with all that oxygen? A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.